Senator Ruston.
Thank you, Mr Deputy President. And before I make my contribution in relation to the Biosecurity Bill, can I just acknowledge the extraordinarily bipartisan approach that the Labor Party has taken with the government in trying to come up with a good and robust set of security measures for Australia's biosecurity. I mean, this particular Biosecurity Bill has been around in various guises for a number of years now. It's been debated, and the committee system has consulted widely on this, both as when Senator Sterle was the chair of the committee and now with Senator Heffernan being the chair of the committee. And I think that what we see today with the Biosecurity Bill 2014 is certainly a reflection of the extraordinary work that was done with the Biosecurity Bill 2012 and the committee that was chaired by Senator Sterle. This particular bill has come about because of the need to replace the complex 106-year-old Quarantine Act 1908. And as anybody would realise, that a bill or an act that was put in place in 1908 is most likely not going to have a great deal of relevance today, and that's exactly what's happened over the intervening 106-year period. Is that the Act has continually been amended, but principally the original Act of 1908 remained in place. And so this particular bill is a reflection of the need to update that 1908 Act to make sure that it reflects the biosecurity risks that we face in 2015. It's interesting to note that when that Act was actually first passed in 1908, the only way that any goods came to Australia was by sea. And you can imagine that sea arrivals only would have meant that there were a lot less things arriving by sea, a lot less regularly, and the ability for any government or agency to be able to intervene and to test and check those sorts of goods is quite a different story than it is today. Just in the last decade alone, the number of air passengers has grown by 80%, and sea containers have grown by 82%, bulk cargo by 16%, and these numbers are just going to continue to grow. And if you look at it in the context of the requirement of the resources of the department to deal with these quarantine issues, in 2012-13 alone, the Department of Agriculture had to clear 16 million arriving international passengers, 186 million international mail items, 1.7 million sea cargo consignments and 26 million air cargo assignments. So, it really does put in context the quantum of the issue for which this particular biosecurity bill is seeking to deal with. So the main purposes of this bill are for the management of biosecurity risks in general. So that's the risk of pests and diseases, and that includes human diseases entering Australia, getting themselves established in Australia or spreading in Australia. The risk causing harm to humans, animals, plant health, the environment or the economy all need to be considered in the context of this biosecurity. One of the major issues is the risk of ballast water, as you can probably imagine, with our sea-going vessels, and with the areas such as the Great Barrier Reef and the extraordinary importance of the protection of that particular asset. We have to be very mindful of what's being discharged at sea. And also dealing with biosecurity and human biosecurity emergencies. So the idea with this bill, as I said initially, the principal purpose was to get into the 21st century an act to enable the administration of what is a very, very changing space. But it also seeks to deal with some of the complexities of the regulatory requirements and administrative practices to make sure that they are much easier to administer, and also to give greater flexibility to the Commonwealth so that it's able to manage these risks in a modern and flexible way, and in a way that reflects the current environment and contemporary industry practice. But it also seeks to give powers to make sure that we're able to continuously monitor and manage both onshore and offshore risks, and that it is that the tools that we give to the people who we're requiring to undertake this compliance, that they are tools that are fit for purpose, they're modern and they're useful, and they actually reflect current day activity, because the actual Quarantine Act only contains criminal penalties, and as we know in modern society, that there are a whole heap of other tools that should be made available to compliance officers to make sure that they get the best possible outcome for to deliver the outcome that's being sought for Australia. So, as I said, the primary objective of this bill is to manage biosecurity risk. It's interesting when you have a look at. I was mentioning in my opening statement about this process was started under the previous administration with the Biosecurity Bill 2012, and as part of that process, the Rural and Regional Affairs Committee, the department, undertook to do quite a lot of stakeholder consultation to try and determine what was going to be the best possible outcome. And there were a number of things that came out of that consultation process that have been incorporated in the 2014 bill, which make this bill, I think, a much better tool to reflect the needs. And one of the things that was very, very strongly put to us as a committee in our negotiations and consultation with the broader industry around Australia was the need to actually accept that there are regional differences. A one-size-fits-all biosecurity approach to import or to biosecurity risk was something that the regions and the industries didn't believe was necessarily in their best interest. So this new bill actually reflects that there is a need to identify regional differences, and that the risk analysis process that's associated with various products needs to be considered in this context. So, as a result, there have been some changes to this bill, but particularly to clarify the consideration of regional differences in biosecurity and how they then play out in the risk analysis, and making sure that there is a level of independence in doing so. So, as I said, there was quite a substantial engagement with stakeholders, and that consultation has resulted in these changes. But one of the things that we do need to be very mindful of is that whilst we have identified the regional differences as they currently exist today, there is a requirement that we can constantly continue to talk to industry and to monitor changes in regionality and changes in the landscape to make sure that future regional differences that may well come about are considered as an ongoing issue when we develop our biosecurity position in Australia. There is no doubt that there is constantly a dilemma in this space about our ability to assist our agricultural industries, particularly to find new markets around the world, to make sure that we have as free a marketplace as we possibly can so that we can benefit the consumers in Australia so that they can get access to products that are coming into Australia that they may well want to consume. So it's very, very important that we accept, well, as an exporting nation, Australia relies heavily on our primary producers and manufacturers, and to make sure that the balance of payments of this country are such that we remain the prosperous and first world country that we are. But one of the things that constantly and increasingly has become a risk to Australia is biosecurity, and it's about balancing, ensuring that we maintain a level of biosecurity that ensures that into the future that we don't end up with a situation where Australia ends up with a country that doesn't continue with its clean green image that it currently has. But at the same time, we have to be very mindful that we are a trading nation and we wouldn't be as successful or as prosperous as we are if we weren't. And there are a number of instances that Senator Sterle raised in his speech about the consequences of an incursion and how terribly difficult this balancing act is, because, as you well know, Madam Acting Deputy President, governments are faced with finite resources in which to put into all of the myriad of areas which government has to fund and has to look after. And so, whilst as a primary producer myself, I'd love to think that we had unlimited resources to put into biosecurity. That's not the case, and so we need to make sure that we've got legislative tools in place so that we maximise the level of protection that we can give to our farmers within the reasonable context of those parameters. The risk analysis that gets undertaken, and whilst I have been a critic of the way the department has approached risk analysis in the past, and I've also been probably a critic about letting biosecurity play second fiddle to trade on a number of occasions. There are some very clear examples that that we can put on the record to show that there are two things that need to be balanced up here. One is the likelihood of an incursion, and the second one are what are the consequences of that incursion should it actually occur. And subsidiary to that, there are a whole heap of other things about our readiness to respond to an incursion, etc., with the capacity to actually deal with it, even if we had the resources and the like. But when you have a look at some of the extraordinary things, one of the ones I think it was the Australian Bureau of Agricultural Resource Economics and Sciences that estimated that even a relatively small outbreak of foot and mouth disease in only one state has the potential to cost Australia in excess of $5 billion. And when you consider that that is one tiny little outbreak in one state, you can imagine the consequences if an outbreak of foot and mouth disease was able to get away in Australia. So you have to weigh up the cost of the biosecurity measures that are put in place against the potential outcome should an outbreak occur. Now, was foot and mouth disease at this stage is possibly unlikely. The level of likelihood of an incursion may be quite small. It doesn't take you very long to realise that the cost of such an incursion would have such a devastating impact, not just on the people who are in this industry, but the broader Australian economy, that we need to be very mindful that we put those sorts of that is considered in making a decision as to when we allocate resources. There was another one that occurred, the citrus canker that occurred in Emerald in Queensland. We saw the entire citrus industry in one state completely decimated by the introduction of a particular disease into that state. I mean, luckily for Australia, we were able to quarantine it in Queensland. No consolation for the Queensland industry, but certainly for the rest of Australia. But once again, you see how something as small as one person being able to import a particular product into Australia that was infected by a disease that completely took out an entire industry in a state. So it's really, really important that we have a look when we're looking at these risk analyses, is that we weigh up not just the cost of the biosecurity measure, but also the potential cost to our economy should such an incursion occur. As I mentioned, we've been working on this in the Rural and Regional Affairs Committee since 2012. This particular bill was referred to the Rural and Regional Affairs Committee to have a look at, and the committee made a number of recommendations. So we've only had the bill for a very short period of time, but given the amount of work that was done previous to this bill, we were able to use a lot of the information that had been contained in the consultation that occurred over the 2012 bill. But the recommendations there was a number of recommendations, 14 of them which were recommended in a non-partisan approach, and everybody agreed. I suppose it was a little tiny bit disappointing that despite the extraordinary amount of effort that went into this particular investigation, as well as the one in 2012, that there was a dissenting report and also some adverse comments put in by the Greens. So I was disappointed, but nonetheless, that shouldn't go against the fact that there was a genuine attempt to try and come up with a consensus report. Just disappointing that in the end we actually failed to achieve that. But there were a number of recommendations in the report, and I would think that it would be very likely that, given how sensible they appear to be, that the government would, I would like to think, would certainly consider them. Just a couple of them to put in context. There was a recommendation to ensure that that any review that's conducted that is undertaken under ministerial review powers is publicly released, and I think that and tabled in Parliament to give a level of transparency to this particular review process. And I think that there is no doubt that that the committee unilaterally thought that that was a good idea. In relation to the biosecurity risk assessment, or the Bureau process, It was once again very clear that the committee thought that the use of, or the reliance on scientific evidence and best scientific endeavour were absolutely essential to getting the right outcome, and that the Director of Biosecurity should be given the opportunity to use whatever expert skills and advice that he sought and thought that he needed to ensure that the biosecurity risk assessment was as thorough as it possibly could be. And also to make sure that in the process of undertaking these risk assessments, that there is a constant and ongoing requirement to consult with industry, that we don't, so that we've got science on one hand underpinning the decision making, but also making sure that we speak to the people that are going to be impacted on by any consequence of an importation of a product in Australia, that their interests and their needs and their first-hand, on-the-ground experience of the consequences are included in that risk